Hey, so this is our first APUS review. Sorry I posted this a little late. I just didn't want to confuse people for the final. So anyway, here we go. So what I'm going to do is I'll describe kind of what's happening with the key concepts, and then with the information that I give you, plus the information on Quizlet, that is the terms that are kind of connected to the key concepts that I'm talking about, as well as your class notes. Go back, take a look at your class notes, take a look at your reading notes from the time period, and create a really nice solid narrative paragraph or so for each of the key concepts. Um, and then enter that information in on a map page that's on the other side of, or on a totally different page, or pages, um, on the other side of this key concepts, or in addition to this key concepts things. I know you don't really know exactly what I'm asking for. We'll take a look at them on the first review day, and you'll get a better idea of what it is that I'm looking for. Having never done this in the past, I leave it up to you guys. Be creative, make some cool stuff, and then we'll see kind of what works. Okay. And then if you wanted, again, the extra credit, I can show you what that looks like on what am I on now? Like Tuesday, Wednesday next week, as well as you could probably figure it out, especially if you had me last year. You can probably figure it out by reading the instructions on the APUS review day 1 sheet that's located on the Canvas. Okay, so here we go. So key concepts, I'm going to go pretty fast here, so you're really going to have to fill in the information from your Quizlet. Really, don't just take this as your only thing. Please, as you're filling out this review form or kind of thinking about this review, please don't just take this singular thing that I'm about to say about each of these key concepts. Please fill in more information, because like I said, I'm going to go fast here. This should be done. I should be done in 10-15 minutes. Okay, so the time period that we're talking about here is 1491 to 1754, so that's pre-Columbian contact through the end of the 7 Years' War. Okay, and so we're really thinking about the way that the American colonists have developed. And particularly a thing to notice here is that the American colonists are developing a level of independence from Britain that is going to then come around, and then if you're British, bite you in the butt, because we're going to rebel against you because you've left us alone for so long, and then you start to kind of meddle in our affairs. Okay, and the Native Americans and how we get along with them, which generally I'll describe. All right, so the first part there is native populations migrated and settled across the vast expanse of North America over time. They developed distinct and increasingly complex societies by adapting to and transforming their diverse environments. So, before Columbian Exchange began, Native Americans, again, coming across the land bridge and or using boats across the land bridge from Asia and into North America, where Alaska is today, and then migrating very rapidly across the North American continent. We're talking about 9,000 roughly BCE, although there's a huge argument about that when that happened, but whatever. So by 1491, Native American societies have settled across the entireties of North and South America, and the economic practices that they engage in, that is, how they get food, of course, are harmonious with the environments that they live in. Now, you're in Central America and you're farming maize or corn, you're growing squash and beans, and that's kind of the trifecta of food that they have, right? That is maize, squash, and corn. That's in the desert kind of southwest, okay, in the North America, going all the way down in Central America. And then, of course, Latin America, potatoes and maize and squash and beans become kind of the staple there. But it's all over the place. So if you live in a place where you don't have to farm, like you live in the Pacific Northwest, and salmon are so plentiful every single year that all you have to do is work 4 or 5 months out of the year harvesting those salmon, and then you cure the salmon, etc. You can kind of live off of that for the rest of the year. The important thing to note here is that the Eastern North American Native Americans were all farmers, okay? To a tribe. They were all basically based on the foods that they were based on, corn, squash, and beans. Again, that kind of trifecta that the Aztecs had developed. And so, as a result, that varies, of course, widely. Throughout the different kinds of squash and beans and whatever, very widely throughout the North American continent. And as those societies grew, they became increasingly complex politically. Starting with tribal identities, and chiefdoms, and then moving up all the way through large interactive chiefdoms who had, peace treaties with one another and alliances with one another. Again, the best example of that is the Iroquois Federation up in the northeast of what would become the United States eventually, in New York, etc. Okay. So the next question down there, or thinking about it. So contact among European, Native Americans, and Africans resulted in the Columbian Exchange, and significant social, cultural, political changes on both sides of the Atlantic. So the Columbian Exchange is one of the most important things that's ever happened in human history. The incredible numbers of biological organisms that transfer from the Old World, right, that is Afro-Eurasia, to the New World, that is North and South America, and vice versa, is staggering. Just for a couple of things to think about here, the significant social changes that are going to happen as a result of contact with Native Americans and Europeans and Africans is that, of course, we're going to see the Atlantic slave trade begin almost instantaneously. And that happens because when the Europeans show up, there's not enough Europeans to do the kind of labor that's necessary. In many places, like in North America or in the Caribbean islands, where sugar begins to be grown in the Caribbean islands, or in North America, where first tobacco begins to be grown. Again, it's not cotton yet, guys. Okay, so don't jump on the cotton bandwagon too early. But tobacco begins to be grown in North America. And those places where there's a labor shortage as a result of the great dying that happens to the Native Americans because they have very little disease resistance, we decide, that is we being Europeans, decide to bring Africans to the North American continent against their will, but with the help of other African tribes, selling them to us for European manufactured goods, mostly guns, okay? Is where we're going to come very rapidly into this triangular trade. So guns going to Africa, slaves coming to the Americas, and then tobacco and sugar going back to Western Europe. That's the so-called triangular trade. Of course, it's much more complex than that, but I'm trying to make this quick. Okay, so that's the major social significance that's going to shift in the American colonies. I should also mention in the Aztec regions as well as Latin America, we're going to have this incredible shift with Native Americans marrying Europeans and Europeans marrying Africans, and the genetic mixing that occurs in Latin America is much more substantial than it is in North America, where there's not a lot of mixing for the most part. For the most part, European, English, and again, now I'm just talking about what will be the 13 colonies, will come and they'll bring their families with them in large numbers. And so or indentured servants, women, white women in large numbers. And so there's quite a bit less what will be referred to as miscegenation, that is racial mixing in North America, as there is in Latin and Central America. The Caribbean and Latin America has kind of an African, Native American, European flavor, and in Central America it's much more European, Native American, okay, because the Aztec Empire is so big, the diseases don't kill everybody. Okay. Culturally, that's also the kind of change that I'm talking about here, is there's this new kind of racial hierarchy that begins to set up in all of the colonies, where Western Europeans are on top, and then every amount of the Native American / African blood that you have in you, this mestizo mixing that's happening, will create this incredibly complex cultural hierarchy inside the American colonies. Politically, what's happening is that if you're poor, think the European colonies in the north, okay, that is Canada, what will become Canada, which is actually owned by the French for a long period of time, and the 13 colonies, if you're fairly poor, the crown tends to leave you alone because you're too much trouble to really get involved with, for them to really come and really pay attention to you politically. it's going to cost them a lot of focus, and so they tend to ignore us. So as a result, you have that beginning faction of like independence almost immediately right off the bat that's happening in North America. Now, in Central America and the Caribbean, the opposite is true. The Spanish crown and the Portuguese crown are, and the French and the English as well, and the Dutch too, okay, are really interested in controlling the sugar islands in the Caribbean and the gold and silver mines in Latin and Central America. Okay, and so they have a lot more direct influence in those places. Okay, next. European overseas expansion, and again, fill this stuff in with, from your notes, okay? I can't do all of it. European overseas expansion resulted in the Columbian Exchange, a series of interactions and adaptations amongst societies across the Atlantic. So what's going to start to happen is that as societies get, hold on,